Communications, in conjunction with the Santa Monica Chamber of Commerce, bring to you this Election 2002 special. If you live in the city of Santa Monica, the city by the sea, and you've received this in the mail, and you just open it up and you turn to page 55 and you see Measure HH, this is for you. Joining me are two folks in favor of this motion and two against. We're going to briefly introduce them. There's Paul DeSantis on my right, who's the author of this initiative, and he's an attorney. Right next to him is Bob Holbrook, who's a Santa Monica City Council member, and he's also in favor of Measure HH. And on my left is Michael Feinstein, who is the Santa Monica mayor. He's against it. And next to him is Katz, who's a Santa Monica City Council member. Folks, we're going to read the ballot label just once quickly, so let's read it together. Veritas, Measure HH. Shall the city charter and municipal code be amended to change the system of electing city council members by creating city council districts, imposing term limits for council members, and establishing a municipal primary election with runoffs in the fall? To add to the 7-member council a mayor who would be elected citywide and would serve as the council's non-voting chairperson, and to change the process of council action by giving the mayor the power to veto council actions, including emergency actions, which veto would be nullified if a specified number of council members vote to override it. That's the measure as it appears on the ballot. And if you look in your book in both Spanish and in English, there's pros and cons and ups and downs. So do your homework, folks, and then make the democracy work and go vote on November 5th. And I'm Bill Rosendahl, moderating this. And now we're going to start with Paul DeSantis, who put it together. Paul, why'd you put it on the ballot?
I've been working on voter reform since 1988. And the reason that prompted this was, recall there was quite an episode in Florida, and a lot of people were laughing, you know, look what's going on with Chads. And it reminded me, however, we have a much more serious problem here in Santa Monica. In a democracy, people are elected by majority vote. In a democracy, people have accountability, and they also have access to office. And in Santa Monica, no one has been elected by a majority vote in 20 years. And in Santa Monica, unless you are endorsed by a very powerful slate, which usually spends $250,000, or you can raise close to $100,000, you just don't have access. And as a result, it disenfranchises the vast majority of the people in the city from running to office. So that's what motivated me to get involved. Also, just one thing I would like to note is the original Santa Monica City Charter in 1906, when this city was founded, that city charter had the direct election of the mayor, it had 7 council districts, and it had checks and balances. Did not have term limits, which Veritas does have term limits.
Veritas is a Latin word. It means truth.
Yes.
And if I look at the measure and how you got the word, it's Voter Education Reform Initiative for a True Accountability System. That's Veritas. Michael, is this a true accountability system? Why no?
Well, Bill, I don't know what the Latin is for bad government, but this measure, Prop HH, is bad government, and that's why voters and community members, from the League of Women Voters to the police and fire unions in our community to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, all oppose this measure. This would reduce the choice of voters. It reduces neighborhood voice. It decreases accountability of public officials. It increases the cost of election while lowering voter turnout. And probably the worst part about it is it concentrates most of the power in the city in the hands of one person, in a dominant boss mayor who would both be able to veto the council, sit in and influence the council discussions, and control what goes on in the agenda. Right now we have the give and take of 7 council members who have to work together each meeting, and they're elected by everybody in the community. In this system, voters would only be able to vote for 1 seat instead of all 7, so you'd lose your voice for 6 out of 7 seats, and then even if you're lucky enough to have the one person in your neighborhood who you voted for actually agree with you, that person can be outvoted by the mayor with a veto. So it really decreases representation in this community.
Hearing that, Herb, do you agree that it decreases representation, and why are you for this?
I'm Bob.
Bob. Yeah.
I was going to give you a good answer.
No. Well, let me first respond by saying that I don't believe the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People took a position. I think that one of their officers signed a ballot argument who doesn't reside in Santa Monica. That's what I've been told. I hope someone from the audience that knows that for a fact will respond to it. The mayor also said the elected mayor of Santa Monica would control the agenda. That's simply not true. Presently, the mayor pro tem, and the city manager place the items in order of the agenda. Any council member can place anything on the agenda as long as they do it before the close of business on Thursday for the following Tuesday meeting. I think Veritas will provide real representation because it will give the opportunity for people in the neighborhood to choose their council member, and it would be by majority vote. So I think it's important.
You know, I called him your name, and one of the reasons I did, Freudian, you guys are usually on the same side of an issue, and you both are now on opposite sides. Why?
Because I think this is a very, very bad amendment. I think it is less representative. You run in a district, you serve in a district, you will represent only that district, because if you don't, you're not going to get reelected to that district. In 1992, we had a charter commission to analyze districts in this town. It went into its deliberation for it and came out against it for just these kinds of reasons. If someone is elected in a district, they have to get something done in their district, and to do it, they're going to need to get 3 other council members on their side. It's called Let's Make a Deal. And in a city of 8 square miles, which is far too small to do it, they'll make deals all over the place. Then they're going to have a mayor elected who can veto it. They're going to have a mayor that has all-encompassing powers, and it takes 5 votes, I believe, is the amendment, to overturn that. This is not representation. This is not accountability. It is a concept to try and get rid of slate politics. And believe it or not, I'm one of those that would like to get rid of slate politics. I do not think this is the way to do it.
Paul, I mean, that's what Herb's saying. Slate politics is really your attempt to break SMER, I guess. Respond.
Well, it's amazing that we have to defend the American Constitution on the soil of the United States. The provisions that we are proposing here are in the Constitution of the United States. They've been enshrined in that document for over 200 years. And to hear representative government, do you realize that we fought the war with Great Britain to have representative government? They proposed just, you don't need it. The Parliament is taking care of you. You don't have to have representation. So the point is, what Veritas is proposing is found and based in the United States Constitution. It is also the Constitution of this state, the state of California, of representative government, of checks and balances, and the majority of the cities in the United States, and certainly all the important cities in California.
Well, it's true, Mike. Let's face it, the districts is how most of council members are elected. But if you take your community of 8 square miles, you have about, what, 86,000 people?
We have 84,000.
84? And how many registered voters potential?
We have 41,000 residences, 55,000 homes.
So you divide that into 7 districts. What would that mean, number of voters per district?
Well, I mean, you do the math, but when Paul is saying that we currently don't have representative government, the fact is right now each person has 7 people that they can turn to. Under this patronage plan, as I think Councilmember Katz astutely observes, under this patronage plan, people would only have 1 person that they could go to who really needs their vote rather than 7. As to the issue about taking out slate money, there's nothing that has anything to do with campaign financing in this plan. And what happens is by lengthening the election year from just a couple of months to about a 9-month campaign and having 2 elections for every seat instead of 1, this will increase the cost of elections. Sacramento, which has a spring and fall sort of primary and general election scheme, their spending went way up when they went to that sort of plan for their elections. And what this will mean is the slates are involved in this community because of the cost of real estate and the fact that development is so significant here. The same money is going to get involved. It's going to get involved in every campaign. And because most people go ahead and vote on the basis of the mailers that they get at the last minute. You're going to see the same sort of money going in to spend for the same direct mail, but also what's going to happen is by having a longer campaign, people who can afford to do mailers month after month after month are going to be the most successful. The other piece that's so bad about having a primary and then a general election is in the springtime, turnout is really bad. Springtime turnout is 20–25%. So now you're going to have a spring primary selecting 2 people, so you're going to have 20% of the people voting. You're going to have 8 or 9 candidates. That's going to mean the winning people have, are these microphones still on? Yeah? Okay, you're going to have winning people picking up 20–30% of a 20% turnout in the spring and then determining who has a chance to get elected in November. It's an absurdity when right now we have 60–65% turnout in November. That's democracy.
Well, Bob, I mean, he's being very enthusiastic about it. First, the cost, 2, the time frame. It's spread out over a long period of time, and that it really doesn't bring the kind of democracy that the present system has.
That's absurd. First of all, it costs next to nothing to have 2 elections. My goodness, the mayor had us have a weekend election, a 2-day election. So it's $40,000 or $50,000, $60,000, so it's no cost there. And let me talk about something. A point was made that we're only 8 square miles. Let's look at this 8 square mile little city. If you count the airport, which is about 1 square mile, then you're down to 7 square miles. If you take the R1 residential areas where single-family residences are, you probably have just taken out another 3.5 miles. That means we have about 70,000 people living in 3.5 square miles. We're densely populated. We have a municipal bus line that is a regional carrier. It goes throughout the western region of Los Angeles. It carries millions of passengers a year. We have a municipal airport that is very active. We have a pier that is an active enterprise zone, and we have beaches that attract millions and millions and billions of people to Santa Monica. So my point is that that's a lot going on in a little city of 8 square miles with a $360 million a year budget, which is probably 5 or 6 times the size of any other city of 84,000 people in this state or anywhere. So we're not some simple little government. As far as the idea that there's something un-American about having spring elections and November elections, my God, don't we all vote for Congress? Don't we vote for the Senate? Don't we vote for the State Assembly, the State Senate, and virtually every other city of any size I can think of, or neighboring cities? This is what they do. We're just completely out of step with progressive government.
Well, Bill, I would hope that we wouldn't run our municipality like the federal government. I think we do a better job. Over 90% of the cities in California don't have districts and don't have these spring and November. Only the largest cities, San Jose, Long Beach, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Oakland. So I don't buy in that we need that sort of model. Second, Councilmember Holbrook is talking about the expenses of the election, but the issue is not what it's costing the city. The issue is what's costing the candidates to run in 2 different elections. And the other fallacy here is if we have the kind of density that he's talking about, the absurdity of generalizing that the interests of one neighborhood are the same for everybody who lives in them is made even more absurd with a lot of people living in a small area. If there were a very few number of people in one area, you might be able to geographically generalize them. But the fact is, there's only a portion of the issues in this community that are geographically oriented, and there's a lot of issues that have nothing to do with that. And right now, you can go to 7 different council members every week for the 10 different issues on the agenda, and one's going to agree with you on one issue, and one's going to agree with you on another one. But if you go into geography and only one person represents you, and then they don't agree with you on that issue, you have nobody.
Well, Herb, do you want to comment as well?
Yes, I would like to, because I think what Bob just said it shows in favor of voting against this, because we do a lot more than just our city. We look at the region, the airport, as he commented, the beaches, the number of tourists. We're a unique city that has to look more than ourselves. We have to look regionally. You start getting districts and you get people thinking, gee, I've just got to support, I live in Sunset Park, I've just got to back Sunset Park, I've got to think just of Sunset Park. It's counterproductive, bad planning, and it's still, let's make a deal. It doesn't work in this city. It may work in others. You talked about Long Beach. Long Beach is an interesting fact. Back in '92, I had a long conversation with a council member from Long Beach who lived in a blue-collar area, and we were talking. I said, you know, you ought to have some affordable housing in your district. He says, you're absolutely right. I said, why don't you? He says, because I couldn't get reelected, so I wouldn't dare bring it up, or my constituency will never reelect me. That's the kind of thing that will happen. What will happen is, again, Sunset Park, we have the airport. Others don't have the airport. So I would be defending or against the airport, whichever it be, but that's the only thing I would be thinking about. And I'd have to make a deal with other council members.
I mean, his bottom line, Paul, is he thinks it balkanizes the city and causes turf battles, and therefore nothing will get done.
This is an inherently elitist attitude, an anti-democratic attitude. This country was founded on representative government. At the time that our country was put together, the biggest city was Philadelphia with a population of 30,000. And at the time, what they felt was the whole nation is an organic whole, and you would have a representative from each part of the nation so that at the seat of government, it would be in touch with all of the population of the country. And that concept is used consistently in the United States. So this is a very elitist argument, and he's telling us that there's no deals being made now. That if we had districts, of course, there would be political deals, but now there are not deals. And I'll leave that to your own judgment as to whether that's credible. But the fact is, this kind of negotiation is good. Let me give you an example. He keeps mentioning 90% of the cities, most of which are very small. The trend in California is towards districts. Redondo Beach enacted them in the 50s, and Berkeley, liberal city, has districts. It was enacted in the mid-80s, and they have a mayor who is elected by at large. Pasadena, these are comparable sized cities. Now, what happened in Berkeley? Do you know what? People had to talk with each other. And that you did have, it's a predominantly liberal community, but you did have a situation where all parts of the community, all parts of the city had to sit at that discussion table and talk with each other. And that's what we are not getting here. That I think that the deal making and the back and forth is good. What do you think politics is about? My goodness. It's about people being at the table and disagreeing and fighting and finally coming to some kind of consensus. So I'm astounded at the political observation that deal making is not going on now, and I am really offended by the elitist anti-democratic concept that districts, which is the foundation of this nation, the strongest part of the American nation, and why we have survived for over 2 centuries is because it's founded on representative government and checks and balances. And that these have to be defended in Santa Monica just tells us that there's something kind of unique about where we live.
Herb and Mike, I know you're both going to respond, but Herb, I just did a candidates forum in Redondo for one council district. The second, there were 5 candidates, and it was council specific to the district. And when I asked Mike, he said, well, you can do the math. I did the math. It's like 7,000 potential voters in each council district, and an average turnout might be 2,000 to 3,000 people, within that mix of people there. So the numbers are that way. But his comment is saying you got to make deals anyhow in politics.
Well, I think there are deals made. Some of us who are independent try not to make deals. I think it's a different kind of dealing. When you have districts, and Paul said it in one way, but it's really the other way, you'll make bad overall planning. I will make a deal if I'm on one council district with another to get something I want for my district or with 2 or 3 others, and give them what they want. Then everybody has made a deal. But is it good for the entire city? And the answer is probably not. We as council members right now have to look at the entire city. And we may selfishly look at some things our way for our area that we live in, but you've got the others that can say, and they don't have to be accommodated with some other deal. So from that standpoint, we are much more democratic than we would be ever with let's make a deal in a district form. It is not representative. It is really bad politics on an overall city, and this city needs overall planning. Everything from transportation to economy, to what we're going to do with zoning, all of those things affect the entire city. And by the way, the math at 7,000 is a nice round thing, but different districts as would be set up have different densities. Your multiple housing obviously is far more dense than the single family, so it isn't even equal there.
Mike, let me ask you this. I mean, I'm naive on all this, but SMER, which has 5 of the 7 council members, so to speak, even though you're green and who's the other green?
Mayor Pro Tem McKeown.
Okay. You go with SMER basically within the context of the election process, and if that's the strong arm in the town, this district concept would kind of break that concept of SMER, wouldn't it?
No, I think you're going to see the same slates getting on and spending the same money on either side, picking out their own people far in advance. That's not going to change anything. And the fact is, you know, in my own case, I was endorsed by the police and firefighters. I was endorsed by the Sierra Club. I was endorsed by the Santa Monica Dog Owners Group. I was endorsed by Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights. I was endorsed by a lot of different groups. And it's because people run on platforms and the groups who agree with those ideas go ahead and back them that way. So I don't think this really has much to do with breaking up slates.
Well, what does it really have to do with, in your opinion?
Well, you know, I think people have different views of governments, and that's fair. I think this is just simply bad government. And the irony, as we hear these examples about the national government and breaking away from England 250 years ago, if anything, we're creating a king in the boss, dictator, mayor position here because we're concentrating so much power. Councilmember Holbrook is simply incorrect. In our current system, the city manager has the ultimate call on what goes onto the agenda. This proposed ballot measure entirely changes and puts that singularly in the hand of the mayor. The city manager, the mayor pro tem, do not have the executive power anymore, and the mayor can control what gets on the agenda when it appears. So we're really concentrating power. Now imagine, in addition to deciding what happens and when, you've got a mayor with veto power and a mayor that can sit in. You don't have the governor or even the mayor of Los Angeles that has veto power or the president. They don't sit in the congressional debates or the state legislative debates and interfere with that dialogue and the trade-off between 7 people trying to come up with their own ideas first by threatening a veto and then go ahead and have the power to veto afterwards, then deciding what can come back onto the agenda at a later point. This concentrates all those powers in one hand.
Bob, what
so
about
if any
that?
king
It's
is
a lot
created,
of
that's a
power.
king.
It's a lot of power in one hand, obviously. The veto power is pretty strong. I guess it needs 5 votes to override it. How do you answer that?
Okay, I'll start there. First of all, I think what we're envisioning is some ruthless Saddam Hussein as the mayor of Santa Monica who will completely thwart the majority. And I don't see that happening. First of all, can you imagine the mayor say, well, we're not going to do a budget this year. I'm not going to put the budget on the agenda. And by the way, we're not going to buy any police cars or buses because I don't want to put those on the agenda either. I think it's silly. If there's a concern that the mayor isn't putting something on the agenda, and you couldn't do anything with the city manager's help, then, because the mayor has no staff, no office, no staff, no nothing. And this person is going to be the boss king. Think of the rhetoric you're hearing, the boss king, emperor, tyrant mayor. It's ridiculous. First of all, there's been 2 real emergencies in the last 12 years I can remember. One was the civil unrest from Los Angeles, and the other one was the earthquake. The city manager has the authority and power of the charter to declare an emergency and deal with it, and he and she did it until we could convene a council. Everything else, an emergency ordinance merely places something in effect tonight as opposed to 30 days from tonight. And you can set your ordinance to make tonight as the active date of the implementation of the law you're considering, even if you adopt it 30 days later. So that's a red herring. I don't think you'll see 1 or 2 vetoes maybe in a career of a mayor, because I just don't think you'd stay in office very long if you kept thwarting the majority. I want to talk about the cost of campaigns, because I'm in a campaign right now. I am not part of a slate. I am running alone, and I'm raising money alone with the help of a few friends, and it's very, very difficult. I'm barely competitive because people know I've been around for a while. On the other side, the SMER slate has raised about $100,000. Plus, each of their candidates have raised tons of money. All that money is going to be spent to buy slate power. So let's look at where we are today, right now today. 1 slate buying power. Now, if we had 7 districts, it's actually possible that you could be a community person who is involved maybe in PTA at your local school, maybe involved in youth sports, you know, Little League, stuff like that. And people in your community would know you. If you decide to run for council, it's possible in a lot of areas of the city just to walk from door to door. You don't need to raise $50,000, $100,000 to try to win a seat somewhere else in the city, because you could do it in your own neighborhood and do it by yourself. And it's this kind of corruption of the big money involved in these politics that will help this community get representation and allow people who live in the community to represent their area.
Now,
This boss mayor thing, please, I mean, Halloween, but let's not make a joke out of this.
Herb, this should be sensitive to you, obviously, because when I threw it to Michael about SMER and the monies, and he's throwing the monies in the slate cards, you're one of the outsiders in that context, and wouldn't it be easier for you to walk your block and neighborhood where there may be 3,000 or 4,000 voters than have to play the whole citywide and come up with all that money?
Yes, the way you put that, that's absolutely true. It'd be a heck of a lot easier to walk Sunset Park than it would be citywide, but it will not get rid of slate politics, because the slate politicians can run in the same district, have the same backing, spend the same kind of money. And when you do a citywide mailer, what is it, 16,000 some odd dollars, I think, to do a city mailer, plus or minus. Well, whether you do it from 7 districts or 1, it's still 16,000 plus some artwork. The cost of going out and doing it is the same. And you will not necessarily have a district slates being eliminated. That is a fallacy. In fact, I've asked that same question to some of those who were big supporters of this and really started it, and I said, you know, let's assume it works and it gets rid of slate politics. Now you're sitting with a city of districts and an all-powerful mayor, which I really object to. What if it isn't good for the city? Well, then we'll repeal it. Well, that's not an answer. That's a cop-out. Let's get rid of slates this way, and if it doesn't work, we'll repeal it. This is bad government.
Mike, before you jump in, Paul, he mentioned the forces behind putting this together. Who is backing this initiative? Where's the money coming from? Who's supporting it? And why are they?
We have been, there's been Irene Zeevy and a number of people have been working on this for 14 years. We have received the majority of our money from little donations. We've had 80% of our checks have been for $250,000, yeah, that'd be lovely, $250 or less, and 90% of our checks have been $100 or less. And a large number of our checks have been from retired people who have been part of this community for a long time and are wise enough to see that the solution is you have to change the system in order to bring reform. I want to go back to this issue about slates. The goal here is not to get rid of slates. There will be slates, and that's part of democracy. The goal is to stop the slates from dominating the process to such an extent that nobody else can participate. Now, Councilmember Katz makes the point, well, slates would still be happening. But if you're in your own neighborhood where you've been known by your friends, you're on the PTA, you have friends that work with you, David and Goliath, Deborah and Goliath works. Because even if they bring in money against you, you can get your message out. This is what the political scientists say is the key issue. Can you get your message out? Now, with a couple $1,000s in this small area, you have guaranteed campaign finance reform. But to make one citywide mailing is $18,000. And the average non-slate candidate only raises $3,000. How are they going to get an $18,000 one mailer out? They're facing a $250,000 slate budget. So the purpose here is not to get rid of slates. That's part of democracy. The purpose is to allow a candidate to get their message out and to win an election with just a good pair of sneakers and some friends and handing out a reasonable amount of materials.
Mike, respond, and then we're going to take a break.
Yeah. 2 elections in a longer campaign season than we have now with 1 election in a shorter season is going to increase the cost of elections. That's number 1. Number 2, the cost of the mayor's race is going to become the $1 million race because the mayor will dominate the rest of the council. So that's going to add even more cost, and that's going to be the most highly competitive. Third, if you're a quality candidate running in a neighborhood, the slates are going to end up endorsing you or the quality person on the other side, so they're going to be just as involved. Fourth, the absurdity that somehow this is empowering neighborhoods is that let's assume whoever you are, slate backed or not, that you win and you're coming from one neighborhood instead of representing the entire city. Now what's going to happen is the other 6 neighborhoods the council members represent those neighborhoods don't have to listen to the person from your neighborhood. So the bottom line is, even if it were to do what Paul is saying, which I don't think it's going to do, boom, you have lost any access to 6 out of 7 council members. They don't have to listen to you. So this is a fraud on neighborhoods thinking they're going to get more voice. They will have less voice and less power.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and the community is going to be responding and asking some questions. So viewers, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
If you took away a star for every 1 million people who didn't vote, and a stripe for every 5 million non-voters, and a patch of blue for the 10 million people who didn't care, exactly what kind of flag are we waving?
Stop IRS abuse now. Learn how the law offices of Ronnie Deutsch will represent you for free. And whatever you might owe the IRS, we will settle your tax nightmare for just pennies on the dollar. The law offices of Ronnie Deutsch will aggressively negotiate with the IRS and settle any back-owed taxes, levies, liens, and penalties for just pennies on the dollar. Call the law.
By the sea, and we're talking about measure. Welcome back, viewers. We're in Santa Monica, the city by the sea, and we're talking about Measure HH, which is on their ballot, called Veritas. Yes, sir. Your name, please, and where are you from?
I'm Thomas David Carter, Santa Monica, California, Rent Control Board candidate, and I have a question for Mayor Feinstein. After November 5th, will the duties of the city manager change, and will she stop making bad deals like doing the Adelphia franchise fee, which hasn't been in place for 10 years?
Actually, I think we have a very quality city manager, and I think we made a good deal by securing a franchise with Adelphia before they went into Chapter 11, so that whatever company takes them over, if that happens, that we will be in line in order to get the resources that we negotiated for our residents instead of being on the outside.
But the broader question is the city manager making the deals versus others.
Well,
what about that, Paul?
This is a completely false statement. It is a city manager form of government now, and it will remain a city manager form of government. And if you would like to see a model, look to Redondo Beach. Redondo Beach has a city manager form of government. It has complete Veritas system. It's one of the most efficiently run cities in the state. And the mayor plays the same role. He chairs the meeting, and he also has the veto. And they have term limits, and they have districts, and they have inexpensive elections in Redondo Beach. And in Redondo Beach, it costs $1,100 per capita, per person, to run that government. It costs $3,800 here. And if we ran our city at the same way this Veritas city of Redondo Beach did, we'd have $200 million left over.
Mike?
Let's be clear about how the process in the city works. There is either the strong mayor and city council form of government, or is the city manager and mayor form of government. 90% of the cities in California have the city manager form of government, in part to get rid of the corruption that went with the patronage that goes with mayors. But in our community, going back to this business about the agenda, the city manager controls what goes on and when. Under this plan, no other city in California combines veto power and setting the agenda and sitting in the meeting. And what would happen now is our staff at our city is actually very concerned, because instead of working with the city manager and finding out, okay, your project is going to be on in November, your project is going to be on December, your project is going to be on in January, and having a viable work schedule, our staff department heads are concerned because they're not even going to know when their work can come onto the agenda, because it's going to be up to the whims of one person. Our current system depoliticizes the agenda process. And while Councilmember Holbrook talked about emergency ordinances, the possibility of patronage here, where if the city city council is starting to look into an issue about, say, regulating the density in an area or the heights of buildings, the mayor could decide to help their friends and postpone when the council would even consider those sort of regulations until certain people get their projects through. We do not want that sort of incentive in the existing process. It is depoliticized right now by the city manager controlling it, not a boss mayor.
Bob, you agree with that?
No, and I'll tell you why. I talked to Greg Hill, my friend, who's the mayor of Redondo, and I discovered that the city manager virtually sets the agenda. They place the things on the agenda. I can't imagine a scenario where a mayor would say, gee, we're not going to consider the report from the Planning Commission or the staff regarding zoning because I don't want to see it. The first thing that would happen is one of the 7 council members would put it on the agenda and it would be there. So it doesn't make sense. You shouldn't lose sight of an important thing, and that is that presently 4 members of the city council, that's a majority, decide who the mayor will be. And one of the most compelling reasons why people were willing to sign this initiative, they like the idea of choosing their mayor. They don't seem to think that's a foreign idea. They seem to think that's kind of an American idea, that they could choose their own mayor. This will not be a boss mayor form of government. The city manager runs the city. It isn't even a strong city manager. My gosh, if you're a strong city manager, like who? Like the mayor or the mayor of Los Angeles runs the city government. That's not the case here. And look at other cities. Redondo just happens to be close. Pasadena changed their city charter in the 80s to go to representative government, and so did Berkeley. Those places are very liberal, and they believe it was the right thing to do, and I still believe those are well-run cities, and they're very viable, and they're working out well. Thank you.
But just one point on that. I know Herb wants to go. The big money interest who put this on the ballot were very intentionally deceptive by saying, shouldn't you be able to vote for the big money interest? Hey, there was a lot of advertising there. Well, while maybe the large percentage of the money came in from small donations, the large percentage of the money came in large donations, and we had kind of citywide mailings that they're talking about. We had something go out in June citywide to every resident in this city. It was slick. It was a threefold. That doesn't come from grassroots contributions. But the point here is that they intentionally deceived our residents by saying, oh, shucks, shouldn't you be able to vote for the mayor? If all they were talking about is the ceremonial mayor position we have today, which is a ribbon cutter and somebody who chairs the meetings, that would be fine. That's not the issue. They're changing the power, but they didn't tell residents there, and they played on everybody's, oh, that evil city council, they get to choose the mayor, and shouldn't you be able to do it? But they didn't tell you that they're concentrating all the power of the city in one person's hand. And if they're so interested in about democracy, why doesn't their literature talk about that sort of stuff? Why wasn't that in any of their mailers? All it did is play on, shouldn't you take that power away from the city council? That's what happens with the push polling that they do when they call residents and find out what sells, but that has nothing to do with democracy.
Okay, Mike. Now, before Herb jumps in, because I do feel you need to respond to that, Paul.
Well,
first of all, is there big money? Because follow the money.
We had, I think it's around $52,000 this year. We had one mailing that went out, and then the second one. And we're facing $250,000 from the SMERS slate, and the hotel slate is putting in over $100,000, and we're just talking about Veritas. That's all but they and their telephone calls are talking about vote against Veritas. So we're facing $300,000, and he says, well, you guys with the 52,000, who are the majority of them are small contributions, you're the big money. Only in Santa Monica. And I want to come back to one other thing, only in Santa Monica. Only in Santa Monica do we have to defend the idea about having a representative government, where the election in the spring, in the primary, is if someone does not get 50% of the vote, then we have a runoff. That's how we ensure getting a majority vote. And I think if somebody cannot make it, they feel it's a waste of their time to go to this spring primary to vote, then they don't deserve to vote. This country is worth taking the time to go to the election in the spring and in the fall, and I think it's an insult to say, oh, it's just too inconvenient. In fact, the most important vote would be in the fall, because very rarely will anyone get 50% in the primary. So you still would have that in the general election, but I have to say I'm appalled to hear the idea it's just too inconvenient to go to the polls twice for this precious right.
Okay, Herb, would you respond to all of that, and then we're going to take another question. Whatever you want, or add to what Michael said. I don't
All
care.
right, let's start with where we're at. This is a unique city because we have one basic slate government that is running the city and has, all except one time that I can think of, and I was on the council. That's where the problem lies. That's the goal. And the concept that they have the money, they do. They have the organization, they do. And for that reason, you go to districts, they're still going to have it, and they're still going to run it. And we won't get anything except less representative government. Now, Redondo Beach is used as an example. It's an entirely different city. It's a smaller city in population. It doesn't have the things we have. It certainly hasn't gone on to do a lot of the things we have. And that's because we've had an overall city council that knows it has to look at the entire city. This is a false amendment. It's the idea, as I said earlier, to get rid of SMER. That slate. It isn't going to work. I think we should get rid of that kind of a slate government. I've always thought so. I'm like Bob Holbrook. I've run independently. I don't want to be part of that slate, but this is not the way to do it.
Yes, sir. Your name and your question.
Tom Larmore, also a Santa Monica resident. I'd like to hear some discussion about another aspect of Veritas which really hasn't been touched on, which is term limits, which I think is a very popular concept. And I'd like to know from Michael and Herb if they oppose that part of Veritas as well as districting, and also the response from the proponents about why it's important.
Okay, before they respond, I just want to ask Paul, you put this on the ballot. What are the term limits?
The Veritas has progressive term limits, which is instead of, you have 2 terms. After 2 terms, an individual,
4 years?
consecutive,
4 years?
2 consecutive.
It's 8 years?
Right. But what's different with Santa Monica's and why we think this is a progressive measure is that you then have to sit out for 4 years, but you can come back, which is Herb Katz came back. So that, if there's somebody who's really popular, you can come back. In many communities where they have term limits, once you've served your 8 years, you can never come back.
What do they have now?
We have no term limits in Santa Monica.
I see. Okay, Herb, you came back.
Yeah, I came back, and I will say that I happen to support term limits. I think it's a good idea. I think this is one part or 1/3 of this charter amendment I think is good. Having served 8 years, and I admit I was burned out, and there were other reasons I got off council, but after 8 years of away and then I came back, I was at least fresh. I don't know if the city was, but I was. But the main thing is, this is 3 charter amendments. Had it been put on in thirds, we might all look at this differently. I support the term limits. I have no problem with it.
Bob, what do you say on this?
Well, I support the term limits as well, because personally, I believe that we need diversity on the council. We need people elected from all over the city. I've carefully watched the political process in Santa Monica this year, and frankly, I thought there would be new people coming forward who'd like to run for office and would have a chance of winning. Well, I didn't see that happening, but I finally decided I would pull papers when I didn't see that happening, but I didn't turn them in until after the SMER convention, and I watched to see what they would do. For what will be the 98th year in a row, there is no endorsement of somebody from the Pico neighborhood. I think that's terrible in a city, that we know that for the 100 years, counting the 2 years in the future to the next election, that no one from the Pico neighborhood has ever served on the city council. Just one gentleman was appointed for part of a term. And there's something fundamentally wrong with that. And I don't care how you view this thing, but the one thing that's compelling is, why is there one neighborhood in our city that has never, ever, ever been able to elect someone, and they've tried over and over, and this year they came forward with a candidate who did not receive the slate endorsement of SMER and has a limited chance of winning. So
Well, let's
that's
go
how
to
I
you,
feel about it.
Mike. Who is this person we're talking
Well,
about?
let me touch it, but let me go in order. Number one, Herb said he likes term limits, but he doesn't like the rest of it. The fact that this was drafted in private without public process means that you're stuck with all of the 10 different changes that it has. So even if you like one, you're condemned to have to vote it up or down, and you couldn't have had a public input choice about what you like and don't like, which speaks to the fact that these folks aren't really concerned about democracy. Number two, we hear all this talk about how somehow we don't trust the voters here because we're against this. Well, the arrogance of telling the voters who they have the right to vote for and who not to. In our city, 85% of the council members in the last 30 years have served 2 terms or 1 term. That means only 15% have gone beyond 2 terms. That means the voters have made that choice for what mix of experience and newness they want. We have had incumbents from the left and the right who have been defeated after they've run for re-election after being in either 1 term or 2 terms. So our residents are smart enough to decide who should be in office.
But Michael, what's this PICO business?
And the business about PICO is we have had people who've been elected from the school board and the rent board from the PICO neighborhood, and this year Josefina Aranda from the PICO neighborhood is running for office, and I actually think she's going to win, despite the fact that she didn't get one of the slate endorsements. She's got several other endorsements. She just got the National Women's Political Caucus and the Sierra Club. So I think that Josefina is going to win anyway because she's walking door to door and she's a strong candidate. People recognize it. And the fact is we've had very few candidates run from the PICO neighborhood. Now we have one, and I think voters are going to go ahead and elect her. But the difference is she's going to come into office with support citywide and knowledge citywide and accountability citywide instead of one person coming from PICO who has no power to deliver for that neighborhood because nobody else needs votes out of that neighborhood. And that's what their plan would do.
Well, let's go back to the Constitution. First of all, it sounds like if the American Constitution were put up here, they'd say, well, we can't do it. It's got talk about the president and the legislature in the same document. Well, you have to talk in veritas about term limits and the election of the representatives and the independent election of the mayor, because that's part of the checks and balance system. The checks and balances which we do not have at this time. So the process from 1988, there were a bazillion meetings, and Mike attended some of these meetings where this was developed. Then we had the Charter Review Commission that they spoke of. Do you know that Irene Zeevy and I weren't asked to be on? Now, I don't take this personally, but I just want to tell you that when government wants to have a commission come out with the answer that it wants, make sure to not put people on that Charter Review Commission who are going to be speaking in favor of democracy.
I know we have a question.
May I respond?
Well, Herb appointed.
All right, Herb, go for it.
Since I was part of
Sure.
part of the council that did the appointment to the 92 Charter Commission, and as I said earlier, that commission went into their deliberation supporting it. They really thought it was it and came out not supporting it. And what I hear is 2 people, Paul DeSantis and Irene Zeevy, weren't appointed. That wasn't going to make any difference. That wasn't where it was at, and if that's a sour grapes attitude, that's why you're doing this, I think it's misled.
Okay, yes, sir. Your name and your
My
question.
name is John Petz. I'm from Santa Monica. I have a question. I'll start with Herb. I'm really confused, and you yourself a moment ago said that, you know, there's always going to be deals, and I've witnessed myself. There's deals at the SMER convention, before it, after it. There's deals with the hotels. There's deals every way you go in politics. So we won't get rid of deal making. But we have a Congress where people have to make deals all the time in order to get bills passed. What has befallen cities like Berkeley? Because I think of Berkeley as a progressive city, and I'm wondering 2 questions in a way. What has happened? What's been the downfall for that city as a result of going to this type of government? And 2, what would be an example that you guys could share with us of the way in which a particular issue would be handled differently under this form of government between the 2? Because we haven't had an illustrative example of how things would work differently, knowing deals are going on everywhere.
Good question,
Okay,
John. Okay.
I'll try it this way. Berkeley, I'm not up on. I haven't researched what their good, bad is. I have not talked to their council members, so I'm going to pass on that part of it. When we talk about deals, I know for a fact that what you've got with the slate politic we have now is there's a lot of deals made. I can walk into a council member meeting right now at almost any time and tell you how the votes are going to go. That's sick. And this way of doing it, it may be different deals, but it'll be just as bad, only worse. And you want a concrete example. Somebody wants to put up traffic controls running throughout the city, and now we'll look at the entire city, whereas if it's districting, you'll only care about yours. I want mine, and I'll give you something in return for yours, and that's the kind of deals that I think is even less healthy.
Before, Mike, you jump in, Bob, I want you to respond to what he just said.
Well, obviously, I have some suspicions when there's an item on the agenda because of the previous history with my colleagues, how the vote might turn out. And sometimes a colleague will call me and say, I want to, appoint someone to the commission. I hope you look at their resume closely before you do it. But I don't participate in deal making, and maybe that's a fault. Someone once accused me of not being a politician. Well, I'm not. I'm a pharmacist, and I serve the city in this capacity because I love it, the city and the people. I want to just, respond a little bit about the idea of representation, and the Santa Monica voters were surveyed by the city, and the biggest problem they thought, the people that live here, and this was a survey done by the city, was the problem of too many homeless people, and it was affecting the community and affecting their lives, and they were very, very concerned, number one. Number two is traffic. Now, how could you ignore those things, no matter which district you came from? How could you ignore the problems of traffic? How could you ignore the fact that we had the oldest police jail in the state and we need a new building? How could you ignore the fact that we needed to have a modern library? Of course, there are people that live in neighborhoods. Oftentimes, we'll look to Michael for input from Ocean Park because he lives there. He knows probably Ocean Park better than I do, although I grew up there as a kid. Herb and Richard live in Sunset Park, and when they talk about, there's a problem on 23rd Street, we listen carefully because we know they live there. I just wish we had that kind of input from all around the city, and I really think it's a crime that we've shut out people from Pico neighborhood from being elected. Several nice people have tried, and they frankly have given up. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more question, and then we're going to have final comments. Yes, sir.
I find this...
Your name?
My name is Ron Picard. I've had a service business on Main Street for 20 years, and I see a lot of how things work in terms of the city and the business community together.
Great, your question, Ron.
The first, as a perspective, is I find the idea that independent district representatives won't have any power. I think what you find to the contrary is that every council person, because they want the options to represent their district, give those options to the other representatives.
Fair enough, Ron, but what's your question?
Okay. So how do you, how do you, don't you see there's this natural dynamic outside of seeing the collective whole as being good for the individuals, but you're not going to back, if you're from a specific district, you're not going to always tend to back the council representative of other districts because you want them to back you in your district?
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate that, Mike.
Yeah, that really brings us back to the misuse of the word deal making. By having patronage-oriented individual districts, you go into deal making to horse trade with other people for your thing versus their thing. That's a difference between 7 council members who are a priori accountable to the entire community because they need votes in the entire community. Then you have 7 people trying to get 4 out of 7 majority to pass something each week. But that isn't deal making. Deal making is, that's the give and take and the checks and balances that go with the deliberative process. Deal making is when you have different people from different areas trading back and forth with each other. And the point about being informed by people from districts is our residents come to our city council meetings. We have a valued public process, and if they're from an area, they talk to us. But every interest is not geographic.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Deep breath, everybody. You got 1 quick minute, again, to tell us why yes and why no. All right, we'll start with why yes on HH. From you, Paul. 1 minute.
The United States was built upon representative government. And representative government means that the people in the area choose their own representative. And that person is responsible to those people. Not to a slate, responsible to those people. And that gives a direct line of connection between the people and the seat of government. It's the concept that's enshrined in the Constitution of the United States, and that's what we seek to bring here. The checks and balances enshrined in the Constitution, that's what we seek to bring here. And we also seek to bring moderate term limits, which will give a fairness to the system and allow more people in, plus the fact that there's a runoff to ensure a majority vote.
Thank you, Paul. Herb, final comment, why no?
Why no is because of everything I've said earlier. I am already a district elected council member. It's called the City of Santa Monica. This gives me and my fellow council members a chance to solve overall solutions, not just one district solution. It gives us a chance not to have power in one mayor who has complete power, who has veto power. It will just help destroy this city, and I think it's wrong. I like representing the entire city.
And final comment, Bob. Why yes?
Why, yes. 2 years ago, there was another good government issue called the Oaks Initiative. The council said it was dumb, it was bad government. The people voted for it, and then the council made the remarks that the people just didn't know what they were doing. They're telling you the same thing tonight. It's simple. If you want to be representative by districts, you vote for Proposition HH. If you want to continue the system as it is and let SMER and the big money slate that they are choose who will represent your neighborhood, then continue this system. Vote yes on HH.
Mike, why no?
Currently, you get to vote for all 7 city council seats. Under this plan, you lose your voice for 6 out of 7. Currently, your neighborhood has to be heard by all 7 council members. Under this system, only 1 has to listen to your neighborhood. The other 6 can ignore you. Currently, there are checks and balances between 7 council members going back and forth and having to deliberate together. This transfers the power to a single mayor. This increases the cost of election by lengthening the election season and having an expensive mayor's contest. It lowers voter turnout, and it is opposed by the League of Women Voters, the Santa Monica Police and Fire, and as I said at the beginning, representatives of the Santa Monica Venice NAACP.
All right, well, there you have it, folks. The City of Santa Monica supplement puts it out there in black and white. Take it and take a deep breath and study it yourself. We want to thank the Chamber of Commerce for sponsoring this, giving us the opportunity to bring our cameras from Adelphia. I want to thank Catherine Dotson, the Chamber Executive Director. I want to thank Linda Tischerman, who's the Chamber President and Staff Support Incorporated. Nate Travis, a living legend, who's co-chair of the Government Affairs Committee of the Santa Monica Chamber Board. He's a board member. And Sharon O'Rourke, who's co-chair of the Government Affairs Committee of Southern California Gas Company, for putting it together and making it happen. I want to thank the panel, the 4 of them, for their articulation and giving us an insight into this proposition. I want to thank the audience here for participating, and I especially want to thank the cable viewer for sharing your time with us. God bless you, and bye-bye.